business, how to create a budget, how to know what a P&L was. He may be bright, but he's only 2 years removed from college. I have built 6 companies from scratch. Ladies and gentlemen, I know what it's like to sit there when you don't have enough money coming into a company or into your personal budget and go, we need to make some tough decisions. There's a big difference between the two of how that would happen. Your second question was what, Dean?
Well,
why didn't he show up?
Why didn't he show up? I don't know why he didn't show up. I heard he was going to be in Augusta at a GOP event, and then somebody said they called and there was no GOP event, and then I heard that there's a fundraiser across the street. I don't know. That would be a good question. If he was here, I'd love to ask him. I don't know.
If he was here, you wouldn't have to ask.
That's true. If he was here, I don't know. It'd be unfair for me to really...
According to his campaign manager, he had a conflict of scheduling it as of yesterday.
I know he was in Cartersville because I was told he was in a board meeting at 1 o'clock.
but he did commit, right?
No, he has, oh yes, he was committed.
What day?
He did originally commit.
What day did he commit?
Last Wednesday.
Okay, that's plenty of time.
I don't know. Last
and then
question.
And then the voting. You know, I mean, I was always under the impression that if you voted on the original day of voting,
Right.
you were the only one that could vote if there was a runoff. But my understanding through somebody else today was that, hey, anybody can, this is still an open election for anybody as long as they've registered.
That's what I've been told as well.
That's my
Okay, so I wanted to make
understanding
that
as well.
clear because, you know, I wasn't aware of that myself.
Okay. Next question. Jeff?
Hey, Bruce.
Congratulations on your campaign.
Thank you. I, like all of us, I've heard and observed that you're a candidate of real principle.
Yes, sir.
This question is really a question of philosophy of leadership. When you look at elected office, you look at representing your constituents, all of them, the ones you agree with and the ones you disagree with. The question, though, becomes kind of difficult, and I'm sorry, the question. In that there's the philosophy of being a mirror of your constituents and actually providing initiative or leadership by taking your principle and applying your principles and applying it in terms of public policy in the best interests of your constituents. Which are you? Are you going to get out in front of issues, some of these issues we've talked about, and really provide leadership, or are you going to, you know, the other extreme? I'm not suggesting you do this, but put your finger to the wind and figure out what's best for your political career and go in that direction.
It's a great question. It's a bit challenging, but I will say this. If anyone looked at the past when I've served as a chairman of a board, whether it be at the chamber or even at our church, because I happen to serve as a chairman of personnel at First Baptist Cartersville, I think number one is you're there to chair a committee. So you've got to learn how to bring people together, hear all of the ideas, regardless of who those people are, and then if there can't be a consensus on a decision, somebody needs to take some leadership. And then explain that leadership. So, for instance, I better have the pulse of the people of District 14. And in this case, happens to be well over 60% Cherokee County. I better have a good pulse. Whoever is your senator better know what Cherokee County wants. It's not in any way to dismiss Bartow or Cobb. When you go down to the assembly and you're faced with some tough decisions, you need to come back, as we talked about earlier, when I was talking about Scott and I was talking about Michael, you need to explain your position to the people and be accessible. Because it very well may be that a vote that took place...
Sorry.
Is it my time's up? It very well be that you had to make a decision on a vote that actually had additional things attached to it that nobody really understood. So to answer your question, being transparent, being able to listen to people and understand what your position is, and then you've got to lead sometimes. You've got to initiate some leadership, like what you said. It's no secret in Bartow County, there have been times, as a chairman, I initiated some pretty tough leadership. I was very fortunate during that time that the results were very, very positive. So you did the same thing at the church. So
Thank you.
yes, sir.
Yes, honey.
Kristen Knowles, many of you might not know me. What would you do? You said, for example, texting and driving. What would you do to pass that legislative issue?
Well, texting and driving right now are already a law. Okay. The challenge is, but First of all, I'd like to say I commend you for being here. If we had more young people like yourself, I think that starts with your parents. If we had more young people like yourself involved, you'd be better educated, so I commend you. But we already have laws in the books. The challenge is this. We have cars with GPS that tell you where you're going and everything else, and you can talk to that can automate music and all kinds of things. But yet we don't have any way really to pull across the board to be able to minimize, let me get rid of this, the texting that's going on in cars. There's plenty of technology out there that we can do to be able to put this in place if the temptation is not there. And it needs to be across the board.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Colleen. We have a citizens group, Georgians for Healthcare Freedom, that is working towards nullifying Obamacare in the state of Georgia. We have over 30,000 signatures. Will you support it?
Absolutely.
Pass it around.
Bruce?
Question? Yes, sir.
Bill Parrish. You mentioned ethics a couple of times tonight.
Yes, sir.
So you obviously have strong feelings toward that. I'm just curious, with Georgia's low ranking in that department, what is your view as to what our problem is? And exactly how would you go about solving that problem? There seems to be a lot of quid pro quo in our state representatives and follow-up. How might you reconcile that with your big business background? In other words, would you be beholden to people because of your background?
Help me understand exactly what your question is.
In other words, if you have business relationships through the Chamber of Commerce or the 6 businesses that you've started, you try to bring customers in, you try to take care of them, you track business.
Sure.
So you get this, it's just natural. You feel an obligation towards the people that support you in your business. And I think a lot of that goes on in the state.
Let me interject, because many of you may or may not know, I've got a pretty strong faith. So I feel like what's in here is going to come out through here. If you look in Micah, it will talk about how our leaders are to act, how we're to conduct ourselves. Ethics are important to me, and again, I wish my opponent was here. But my opponent talked about a couple of things when we first started with residency. He gave 3 different addresses just to be able to stay on the ballot. I don't think that's transparency. You lived on a houseboat, then you had a lot that there's no house on, and now you're in an apartment. There was a DUI that came up that's still public. It still hasn't been resolved, but yet he said publicly, I was swerving to miss a deer. But yet the narrative from the police officer says, when he pulled him over in the accident, strong alcohol, smell of alcohol, and some other things. So I'm going back to, it starts with your candidates. Once you have candidates that are willing to be transparent, and they conduct themselves accordingly, and they get down to the assembly, which I think is where you're asking the question, how do you reconcile business relationships with ethics? I don't think you have to reconcile, because ethics are clear, and business relationships are over here. And if you have trouble understanding the difference in those, it probably goes back to your core.
Well, it's not like when Barnes wanted to get the outer loop. He had an interest in all the land there.
Well, one of the challenges you have is whenever you, and this may step on some toes, but when you don't have term limits in place, instead of you going down and wanting to serve as a public servant, it becomes a business down there. And when it becomes a business, and it becomes intertwined into your business life, there all of a sudden your ethics become a challenge. And I don't know what that means. I'm not saying 1 term or 2 terms, but George Washington only served 2 terms. If it's good enough for him, why wouldn't it be good enough for me? Just a thought.
Okay. Jack?
Typical default on most legislation, and the way it comes at you fast, and I've talked to plenty of people down at the Dome, that these guys don't read the legislation because they don't have time, whatever. So typically, if you wouldn't have time to read it, would the default vote be no? And number 2, would you read it first?
Yeah, I'm not Nancy Pelosi. I don't think we should sign it so that we can find out.
This is not only at the feds, but at the state level happens all the time. I've talked plenty of times of guys down there say, well, gee, I didn't know that was in there. Well, that's your job. I know it's a low-paying job, but that's your job.
If-
Don't you have assistants?
care what your assistant, you have assistants, that's part of the problem, is we have staffers telling people what to do, and the staffers.
How's that?
Yeah,
That's right.
that's the problem.
We need to be well educated on what we're voting on, I'll say that.
Next
Maybe we
question?
should have tangible ballots where we can actually authenticate that it's for real. Because quite frankly, I'm sorry, but to get involved in the political process is a sham. Sorry, sir, that doesn't get it for me. Investigate, indict, and prosecute, that's accountability. Vote him out of office, that's a sham. Party, I don't, there's my disagreement, sorry.
Wait, no, you're not disagreeing. You do have someone being indicted right now.
Who?
Balfour?
I'm not familiar, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, next question over there.
Hi, Bruce. Jason Lowry, Daily Tribune News out of Cartersville. Going back to term limits, since you brought them up, if you are elected this time and you are elected the second time, would you seek a third term?
I don't know if I would or not, because really I wouldn't be serving 2 terms. I'd be serving a term and a half because I'm filling the last portion of Barry Loudermilk's.
Yes, and
I'm sorry.
When it comes to term limits, my understanding is that in some states that have it, that what happens is a representative simply goes from one house, then when they use up their terms, they go to a different house or a different post or something. So they end up still being embedded in the system. So would you be in favor of limiting it entirely, how much you could be in elected office, statewide elected office, or would you only want to confine it to one house or the other house?
It'd be really hard for me to take a hardline stance on this because I'm not down there to see. One thing I don't want to minimize, I would hate to take a hardline stance on this on record to only come back and not represent what I've said, okay? So let me just be transparent about that. But people like Scott and Michael and Ed Stessler and so many other people that endorsed me and are standing with me right now, I don't really know what they go, when they get down there, I don't know what they're experiencing. The reality is when you first come in as a freshman, you're not given the ability to make some changes very quickly. So you need to be a part of the process for a little while. I don't know if that's 4 years, I don't know if it's 8 years or 10 years. I can promise you it shouldn't be 30 years. But I'm not sure what that looks like. So it'd be unfair for me to cast judgment until I'm there.
John?
First, I want to thank Lori for doing an excellent job. Second, I think I have a suggestion. I want to know if you would support it. You know, candidates come and go. You know, I'm 50 years old. Someday I'll be gone pretty soon because I'm 50. But it would
Not
seem,
far behind you. I thought I had a few years left. I don't know if you're trying to eliminate me up here.
Let's all go home. No, the point I make is, would it not make more sense to create what I call a financial best practices bill, which I've talked to other people about, so that whether you leave the term, go to something else, but we put in real best practices controls? Because what I see is, the real issue is that whether it's the local House, Senate, you guys run roughshod. I'm not saying you because you're not in there, over common sense best practices, and put together a best practices bill would eliminate most of these people screaming inside here about the fact that we saw our tax dollars fly out on some scam of the day. And I apologize to call them scam of the day, but that's how I perceive it. I hope you don't take it as an insult.
No. How could I be insulted when I'm here?
That's my question. Would you support a best, like a concept, instead of us talking about it, why don't we just put together, why would you support a concept, putting together a best practices bill? So basically, if a project doesn't meet best practices, we wouldn't have the Bobo project or anything like that, because it would have to meet what is called true financial scrutiny.
Seems reasonable to me.
Okay. I got a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your stand on immigration?
Ooh, immigration, that's an interesting one. That question's come up before. I would not be in favor of us rounding everybody up tonight and just moving them out. And here's why. Hear me out just for a second. Hear me out. Because there's always a cause and effect. And what I don't want to do is put a bigger burden on us as legal citizens. So let me back into the answer. First of all, I'm not in favor of our resources in our schools or in our hospitals or anywhere else being utilized so that someone is not here legally and contributing to our society. I got a real problem with that. But when I hear a mass roundup of everybody and we're gonna take them out, I have people in South Georgia that have said to me, you do that, and all of a sudden, prices are gonna go through the roof. So I don't really know what the cause and effect of that is. It should maybe be a phase out, or I don't know what that looks like. But we do need to do something about immigration. This E-Verify is a joke.
May I offer briefly a very simple suggestion? What if we had...
It's Lori's platform, she'll have to ask her.
Okay, so wait, let him finish his answer first, and then we'll take another
Let's
question.
let him finish first, folks, let's do that, let's let him get done. and then-
All right, that's fine, but I have a suggestion. All right,
Just hold on,
that's
Mark.
fine, stand
Okay, go
by.
ahead.
Simply when someone is arrested and they're found here illegally and we deport them, only to have them come back, took resources that we paid into a system. And it continues to happen and happen again. I'll give you a real life story right now. This is how it's so broken. There's an individual in Cartersville that came over here with his sister 18 years ago, illegally. Never bothered to apply for citizenship. Got married to a citizen here in the United States. They have 2 children. One of them happens to be a Down syndrome child. They have a pretty large construction company. I say large, say 25 employees. They pay taxes. They file their taxes. He went home to Mexico City 4 months ago to take care of his mother, and he cannot get back here. Because our immigration is broken. So he was paying, he's got children here that we're forcing them to now come on to Medicare or something, or Medicaid. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So I'm just not a fan of just, let's just sweep it all out. We've got to look at this and fix it, but we better do something. There.
Okay, Mark, if you have a question,
Okay.
please ask the question.
Okay. What would you think about having a provisional identification where all people who do not have proper documentation, either on Hete Verde or green card or other papeles, papers, we take their photograph, we take their fingerprints, a DNA sample. If the photograph or the fingerprints indicate that they've been implicated in a crime, then we can check the DNA sample. I think we have enough rapists and murderers in this country already. We don't need people coming from over there without a proper background check. But I think one thing which is good is to consider is having some means of saying, you're going to be issued an identification card. If nothing else, we need some way of finding out who you are and what you're doing here.
Okay, so you're asking about an identification
Provisional
card.
identification is a first step to getting this problem under control.
Okay, what do you think about that?
I think it's a good first step. I don't know enough about it, but I think it sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, one more question on this subject.
When we talk about illegal immigration, I disagree with you. I think we should round them all up like Eisenhower did in the 50s and get rid of them. At the same time, I think part of our employment problem is because we have so many welfare programs that our own people are not motivated to work, and I think that they would be motivated to work even in the fields if they weren't getting welfare. So what do you think about scaling back our welfare to give our folks more motivation to actually go out there and support themselves?
That's the cause and effect, because again, if we round them all up, we don't get anything done because we have all these entitlement programs. Entitlement programs originally was supposed to be what the churches were supposed to do. And so first of all, I know that this is probably not very popular, but the churches are supposed to take care of the widows and that didn't happen. So an entitlement originally was to help someone get back on their feet. The problem is it became an entitlement where it then became a control issue. So we've got to work to get rid of that. And I will publicly say this, I have a family member, just a family member. That individual now has 3 different lawsuits I know of so that they could get on entitlement. The last one was they happened to be walking across the parking lot of Walmart. Someone was backing up, bumped them. She sued them.
Well, what would you think about reintroducing shame with regard to these benefits, such as getting rid of the EBT card and going back to food stamps, so when you go into the store, you have to actually give the little coupons and stand there in the line and everybody can see that, by golly, hey, you know, this person's on food stamps. What do you think about things like that? I can't.
No shame.
Do what?
Well, I think they would if they had the coupons and it was, we reintroduce it, because there's so many areas in which we've taken shame out, because people don't know. One of them is the food stamps, another one is credit ratings, you know, that you can't you can't put ads in the newspaper, people owe you money. And to me, that's an abridgment of your First Amendment right. So what do you think about trying to expose people more to the ramifications of their activities?
I think that goes back to core principles of personal responsibility.
Okay, but would you be
And
in
so I would have no
favor-
problem with that.
Okay, so, but would you be in favor of moving our government, our state government, to that, in that more general direction when we have benefits to make, in other words, for example, a business license? Okay, why don't you have to get a license to get welfare? Why don't you have to go sign up and make it public and then publish it, and this person, I mean, if you get a business license, they publish all those people.
I'm not disagreeing, except I don't want to grow the government with more licensing and more this and more that.
I hear what you're saying, but if they're on the dole, by golly,
I understand.
they ought to have to go out there and sign up
Yeah.
somewhere.
Okay, did you have any other answer to anything she said?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I want to ask, because this leads right into food stamps. How do you think we should manage food stamps in the state of Georgia?
Oh, goodness. I don't know the program well enough to know, other than the fact I know it's abused.
Yeah.
Food stamps should be utilized for those that truly need help to eat. It should not be used bartering. It shouldn't be used for any of the vices that we have. It shouldn't be used for any of those things. And there should be a plan for those that can to get off of them. And we don't seem to have some kind of a process or plan to wean people off of entitlements.
Okay, next question.
May I just add on to that?
Yeah, sure, Barbara.
My husband was unemployed for several months, and I think the last 6 weeks of his unemployment, they gave us food stamps. Or they gave us, EBT card. I went back in there and said, my husband got a job, this is who he's working for, this is what he's gonna make, here's the card. They said, I can't take that back. I'm like, what do you mean you can't take it back? Well, we've already loaded it. Well, can't you unload it and give it to some? They're like, no. They sat there and they said, you have to use it. I said, no, I don't. So, there are people who do abuse and there are people who have that stock rep. But when they won't even acknowledge and take it back and say, here, there's honest people who are saying, here, we don't need it anymore. And they're saying, we won't take it back.
That was more paperwork for them, Barbara, that's why they wouldn't.
We have to hire 14,000 people to do that.
I guess so.
Okay, sir, quick
I
question.
have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
This relates to the food stamps and to the unemployment and to illegal immigration. According to the immigration bill that's there before the Washington, I don't know how you would feel as state senator, that if you hire a person who is a natural, American, a Caucasian, a white man versus hiring one of these newly legalized, if this bill passes, persons, that you would be fined $5,000 per position per person that you hire. And that's in the bill. I've actually read it and I blew my mind. How can we stop that? How's that not going to affect unemployment, food stamps?
State sovereignty.
State
sovereignty.
Yeah, to answer your question, I don't know how you stop it, but I should have the right as a business owner to choose who I want to hire as long as they're a legal citizen.
You're right.
Yeah, hey, Bruce.
Carolyn?
The question that I have regards to English only. We've been on the streets the last 4 to 6 months petitioning in front of post offices, at fairs, festivals, anywhere where there's general public. We didn't work just in subgroups, we worked on the streets. We approached everyone, we didn't profile. So that meant we asked Orientals, it meant we asked blacks, Latinos, anyone who came past us, we asked. I can count on one hand how many Latinos signed this petition. Now that should shock everybody in this room. They couldn't speak English, we couldn't explain to them what it was about, they didn't understand. How can we make those people voters? So we've got a big immigration problem, because we've got people that we're talking about making citizens. That should be a difficult process to become an American citizen. We want that, so will you support English only in our state?
No, I think we are. We should be in English only. I mean, the reality is you've come to our country, and if you follow all the laws to become a citizen here, you should learn to speak English.
Amen.
part of the.
I'd like to point out also that when these people go to the website to become a citizen and find the appropriate manner to do this, everything's written in Spanish for them. So they don't have a need to learn English to start with. They're supposed to, but when everything's already in Spanish,
Under Obamacare, every language that's spoken on the earth is supposed to be written for Obamacare.
Oh, boy, that's ridiculous. That's what I think is ridiculous.
okay, any more questions for Bruce? Where? One more? Yes.
This isn't really having anything to do with the topic that we're having now, but I go to the charter school, and I know that you said that you supported charter schools and funding them, and I don't know about other charter schools, but I'm pretty sure that we don't have any government money coming in for us or charter money. How would you go about funding the homeschoolers and the charter school people and private schools?
One thing that's happening right now in Bartow County is the homeschoolers, I've got a great relationship with the superintendent of Bartow County, a great relationship.
What about Cherokee?
Not so much.
Go ahead, I just said.
Dr. Harper has taken a stance of allowing homeschoolers and others to be able to use some of the facilities of the public school.
That's wonderful.
You look at the Career Academy over there, and it's open access to do those things. So within what he's allowed to do, he has been very gracious. That's one step we could do in Cherokee County. We are taxpayers. If we're tax paying and you pay property tax, that portion of that's going to that public school whether your child goes there or not. By all means, you should have access to those. You're paying to it, why shouldn't you have access to those facilities?
Okay, any other questions from the
Sorry?
audience real quick?
Because
Okay,
they're his?
I said they're his.
Okay,
You don't mean that with a capital H, do you?
go ahead.
This is on the immigration. My friend Yurina is from Ukraine. She came here when she was 7 years old. She is here on a visa. She's not really an American citizen. And shouldn't there be a limit to where the parents make the decision if the child should be the American citizen? Because she does not want to be, and she said that it's her choice. And shouldn't there be a limit? Because if she's young and she wants to go back, and she is not an American citizen, could she come back?
Somebody help me with that question.
Yeah,
Should be able to.
she could come back if she
If
wants
she
to.
goes to Ukraine and lives there for another few years and then decides she wants to come back, could she come back?
Depends on what the laws in Ukraine are, I would think,
Yeah,
unless she's a
that's
citizen of the United States.
If she's not a, was she born here?
No, she was born.
So she's not a U.S. citizen in any way, shape, or form, so, okay. I don't see why she couldn't go visit her other family and then come back just like any other Ukrainian citizen would. So that's a real technical issue, so. One more question.
I actually have a question on the food stamps. There was an incident that I heard about in the news where a lady that works at a gas station, a person walked in and tried to buy cigarettes with food stamps, and she told them that she wasn't going to do that because she pays taxes for them to eat food and not buy cigarettes, and she got fired. So if that lady had come to somebody that saying that it wasn't fair that she had gotten fired, would you support having some action saying that food stamps should only be used for food and necessities that you need to have and not cigarettes?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about drug testing for food stamps?
Oh, I'm in favor of that. Do you have a question?
Yeah, a little lighter. What are your strengths personally and professionally?
What are my strengths?
You weren't here at the first part, were you?
I think like most people in the room, we all have strengths and we have weaknesses. I think one of my strengths is knowing that I have weaknesses and identifying those. One of the strengths are I believe I've got a strong sense of leadership. In other words, I can bring people together, black, white, Democrat, independent, in a room. We do that at the board. True story. When I was at the chamber, one of the things I wanted to do early on was we had 17 board members. I said, we need to expand this board. And I felt a lot of resistance. They said, we do not need to expand this board. I said, why don't we expand the board? They said, because we're gonna have apathy, people will not come, the bigger the board gets, the harder it is to get people to show up, and yada. I said, really? I don't think it's the board members. I think it's leadership. If you provide the leadership, and you provide the output, and you have the right people on the bus, then you'll have a very active board. We extended the board to 21 people. I was in that board meeting today. It's a very active board. So having a bit of leadership where you can bring people together and allow them to express themselves, and at the end of the day, walk away in unison to at least a common cause, is something I can do. And I will say that traveling across this district, one of the biggest challenges, regardless of who you are, that you have with what's going on at the Capitol, and Scott would probably attest to this, is the bickering and bipartisan. At the end of the day, the citizens want to see something get done. Do something, for goodness sakes, but don't sit there and bicker. Another, I would say, attribute that I have, my faith is very strong. Everything that I do, I'm going to line up against that. Now, am I a radical over here? No. Is my faith very strong? Yes. But you would never have to worry about me being in the news for some craziness that you see that happens with some people. I can assure you right now that would never happen. Yes, ma'am.
More and more at different levels of government, we're finding being led by non-elected officials, and our leaders that we elect seem to be losing some of what we elected them to do, because these non-elected officials seem to have more power. How do you feel about that, and are you aware of the level of that in Georgia?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, do you have instances that maybe you can share?
Oh, man, yeah.
I mean, specifics.
And then a region commission.
Okay.
We have elected officials that are supposed to serve on that, who rarely even attend those meetings, but there are a lot of appointed people that are on there who are making big, huge policies for the state.
That's a problem. I don't know how you solve it, but that's a problem. I mean, if you are appointed or elected, I mean, we talked about this early on in the campaign about being accessible and held accountable. I mean, the platform I had was CARE, being cooperative, being held accountable, being respectful, and ethics and engaged. That accountable means accountable here to the people, but accountable at the Capitol. I mean, to decide you're not going to show up for a vote because you're afraid to be on record? Really? If you were my employee and you decide, I don't want to show up today because it's going to be a tough day, what would we do? We'd fire them. I mean, we would. And then people say, well, you're on a term. Really? In business world, it's called a contract. I'll circle it and say, well, that contract comes due on Thursday. But guess what happens on the day it comes due? I cancel your contract. We've got to, as people, be engaged in it, and we've got to vet out our candidates and then hold them accountable.
Another example of that is Agenda 21.
Oh, yeah.
It's a clear example of people coming in and doing what they want to do, and you lose control.
How do you feel about Agenda 21?
Tell me a little bit about exactly what Agenda 21 is.
You don't know what it is?
I don't. I mean, I'll be transparent, I don't.
The college kid won't know either, so don't be upset.
Well, there's,
Okay, we'll just go
there
ahead
are
and
people on the
explain it.
internet know a lot more about it than your typical.
Okay, Nancy,
Can
go
you?
ahead and explain it,
Please.
please.
Well, in a
Scott,
short
can you
time-
explain it?
It's a global plan to try to